So a cow comes wandering out of the mist, it looks around and goes, moo.
Just moo.
Yeah, that's it. And that is a revered piece of 18th century Japanese poetry.
It really is.
And according to the monumental study we are deep diving into today, that cow mooing is actually like a roadmap to ultimate spiritual enlightenment.
Which sounds completely wild.
It sounds absurd. So if you are listening to this on your commute, or maybe you're washing dishes right now, and you're sitting there thinking, how on earth does a farm animal making a noise equal nirvana? Well, you are in the exact right place. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
We are exploring this massive multi-volume study on haiku by R.H. Blyth, and we're specifically focusing on Volume 1, which excavates the Eastern cultural and spiritual roots of this whole art form.
Right, the real foundational stuff.
Exactly. Our mission here is to basically dismantle the idea that haiku is just that rigid, cute, 17-syllable exercise you had to write in grade school about the seasons.
Oh yeah, counting syllables on your fingers.
Yes. 5, 7, 5. We want to get past that. We are unpacking Blyth's vision of haiku as a profound spiritual realization, like the practical application of Zen in your everyday life, and this concept he calls the radical return to things.
It's a huge shift in perspective.
It is. So to kick this off, we have to bridge this enormous gap because, we are accustomed to thinking of spiritual enlightenment as this process of extreme distance.
Right, absolutely.
Like you pack a bag, you leave society, sit in a cave for a decade, and just detach from the world.
Yeah, you isolate.
So how does a poem about a cow in the mist reverse the polarity of that entire concept?
Well, to understand how that reversal happens, we first have to map out where haiku actually sits in the broader history of human thought.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Blyth sets up this incredible framework. He argues that the history of the human spirit isn't a straight line. It's actually comprised of two simultaneous and often totally contradictory movements.
Two movements, got it.
Right. So the first movement is the escape from this world, and the second movement is the radical return to it.
Okay.
And the reason we inherently associate enlightenment with, like, sitting in a cave is because that first movement, the escape, it completely dominates almost every major world religion and early philosophical system.
That impulse to escape makes perfect sense when you look at the human condition.
Oh, definitely.
The physical world is just difficult. It's full of sickness, heartbreak, tax returns, stub toes.
Exactly.
Traffic.
Yes, it's chaotic.
Yeah.
And if you are experiencing all of that friction, the logical first step for the human spirit is to just seek a way out. You want a vacation from reality.
Which leads directly to what Blyth calls the pale ascetics.
The pale ascetics?
Yeah, think of early religious practitioners who would starve themselves or isolate in the desert to induce these glowing visions of heaven and paradise.
Right.
They were trying to punish or bypass the physical body to reach the pure spirit. And in Eastern thought, you see this in the desire to spend 9 years wall gazing.
Wow, 9 years. Yeah, to entirely escape the cycle of rebirth and to reach nirvana or the Western paradise. The primary objective is just to sever ties with the messy, tangible reality of trees, stones, and, well, other people.
It's the pursuit of pure abstraction. And Blyth points out that this tendency wasn't just in religion, right? It was in early literature and poetry, too.
Oh, absolutely.
He specifically mentions early Chinese poetry and philosophy leaning heavily into the vast, the vague, the general, and the sententious, which, just to clarify for the listener, when we say sententious, we are talking about writing that is overly moralizing or pompous.
Right, trying to deliver these massive generalized maxims about how the universe operates.
Exactly.
It's the intellect trying to encompass the infinite by stepping away from the specifics. Like, if you want to understand the concept of humanity with a capital H, you have to stop looking at Bob, because Bob is flawed and annoying.
Right, Bob chews too loudly. We can't use Bob.
Exactly, so you retreat into concepts. But then we hit the second movement in Blyth's framework, which is the return to things.
The return.
Yes, and this is where the geological fault line of Eastern philosophy really shifts. Blyth heavily credits this shift to Japanese culture, which synthesized its own native beliefs with the teachings of the sixth Chinese patriarch of Zen, this figure named Huineng.
Okay, I really want to dig into that shift. Why did it happen? If everyone is happily or perhaps unhappily escaping into abstractions and meditating on the void, what prompts an entire cultural philosophy to suddenly pivot and say, actually, let's go back and look at that rock?
Right.
Was it like a rebellion against the intellectual elite?
It was absolutely a rebellion. You have to consider the historical context of Huineng. In the 7th century, the established Buddhist tradition in China was highly academic. It was elite, and it focused on gradual enlightenment through this intense scholarly meditation.
Okay.
The prevailing metaphor at the time was that the mind is like a clear mirror, and you have to constantly, diligently wipe the dust off of it so it can reflect the divine.
So it's a constant chore.
Exactly. But Huineng, however, was an illiterate woodcutter.
Really? Illiterate.
Totally. He came from the absolute bottom of the social strata. And his revolutionary insight, the one that essentially crystallized Zen, was to reject the mirror entirely.
Oh.
Yeah, he argued that there is no mirror, there is no stand, there is no dust, so what is there to wipe?
That is profound.
Right. Enlightenment isn't something you build up to by escaping the world. It is your immediate true nature, accessible right here, right now, in the act of chopping wood or carrying water.
That fundamentally democratizes enlightenment.
It really does.
Like, if you don't need to read ancient Sanskrit texts or meditate for 20 years in a monastery, then the infinite isn't locked away behind some academic gate. It's sitting right in front of you.
Precisely.
And Blyth notes that the Japanese took the Zen concept and fused it with their native animism. But I want to make sure we are clear on terms here. When Blyth talks about a return to the old savage animism, what exactly does he mean? How does that differ from just, being superstitious about trees?
Well, animism is the belief that objects, places, and creatures all possess a distinct spiritual essence. Early humans didn't view nature as dead matter. Every river, stone, and animal had a spirit.
Right. It was all alive.
Yeah. But when we entered the era of abstraction and those grand religions we talked about, we stripped the physical world of that spirit. We took the divine and put it way up in the sky, in heaven, or in the abstract realm of nirvana.
We outsourced it.
We did. So the radical return to things that Haiku represents is bringing the divine back down. It is demanding that we return from nirvana to this world, the only world.
I love that.
Blyth captures the essence of this return with an incredible distinction. He says we have to learn to live not with Christ in glory, but with Jesus and his mother and father and brothers and sisters.
That framing completely changes how I view the concept of the divine, because Christ in glory is an abstract, untouchable ideal.
It's theology.
Right, it's perfect and therefore completely sterile.
Yeah.
But Jesus sitting at a dinner table with his siblings, that involves human warmth.
Yeah, the everyday messiness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That involves someone chewing too loudly, someone spilling their drink, dirt on the floor, the tangible beating heart of reality. It forces the spiritual to exist within the messy friction of daily life.
The human warmth is the crucial element here. Haiku is not cold observation. It is deeply concerned with the intimacy of the physical world. But we do have to address a paradox here.
Okay, lay on me.
If we are just returning to the old animism, looking at trees and stones and rivers, how is this not just a massive intellectual regression?
Oh, that's a good point.
Like, how is a Zen master staring at a rock any different from an early human staring at a rock before they developed language or philosophy?
Right, because if I go out to my backyard and just stare at the oak tree, am I suddenly enlightened? Because my dog stares at trees all the time, and I am absolutely certain he is just waiting for a squirrel to make a wrong move.
Right, he's just hungry.
He's definitely not experiencing a radical spiritual return.
And this is where Blyth's analysis requires us to look at the evolution of the perceiver. The thing we return to is never the same as what we once left, because we have changed in the meantime.
Okay, so the rock is the same, but we aren't.
Exactly. We have passed through the crucible of abstraction. We spent centuries as a species or decades in our own personal lives developing complex thought, analyzing the universe, and creating art and science.
Right, we've done the work.
Yes. And when we finally exhaust the intellect and return to the physical world, the things themselves have changed for us. Blyth actually says that objects take on something of the tenuous nature of the abstractions they turned into.
Okay, let me test an analogy here to see if I'm grasping this. Think about growing up in a very small, quiet, totally unremarkable town.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
When you are 18, that town just feels mundane and suffocating. You have no perspective on it other than it being the thing you desperately want to escape.
Right, you want to get out.
So you leave. You travel, you live in massive chaotic cities, you read philosophy, you experience deep heartbreak and massive success. Then, 20 years later, you come back to that exact same small town.
The town hasn't changed.
The town itself hasn't changed at all. The diner is still there. The quiet streets are still there. But it feels entirely different to you. It is imbued with a new depth because you have depth now.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
You appreciate the quietness, not as a lack of excitement, but as a profound presence of peace. The ordinary has been elevated by your journey through the complex.
That analogy perfectly illustrates the mechanics of the return.
Yeah.
You see the universal hidden within the hyperlocal.
Yeah.
Blyth uses the example of spring and autumn. Before we developed complex thought, spring and autumn were just arbitrary physical realities. It got warm, then it got cold.
Time to plant, time to harvest.
Right. Then we turned them into massive poetic abstractions about life and death. But when the haiku poet returns to them, spring and autumn attain what Blyth calls a body and palpability they never before had.
A body and palpability.
Yeah, they are no longer just weather, and they are no longer just symbols. They are heavily pregnant with meaning. We realize that we are deeply intertwined with these things.
So the treasures of this return aren't abstract concepts. They are, as Blyth lists, the rain on the window pane, the long silent roads of night, the waves falling on the shore.
Yes.
It is the texture, timbre, weight, and shape of existence. And haiku is just the mechanism we use to record the texture of that rainy window.
Let's look at how this manifests in the poetry itself, because there's a haiku by the poet Taigi that Blyth highlights, and it perfectly demonstrates this collision of the mundane and the profound.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
The poem is not a single stone to throw at the dog, the wintry moon.
Okay, let's break this down, because at first glance, not a single stone to throw at the dog, the wintry moon. That doesn't sound enlightened at all.
Not even a little bit.
This sounds like a grumpy guy who has been woken up at 2 a.m. He's actively looking for a rock to physically throw at a barking dog. There is no serenity here. It's violent, it's petty, and it's driven entirely by his ego's desire for a good night's sleep. Where is the spiritual realization in being a jerk to a dog?
Well, the lack of serenity is exactly why it is a masterpiece.
Really?
Yeah, haiku utterly refuses to shy away from the ugly, the petty, or the frustrating aspects of human life. The poet is annoyed. He is completely trapped in his intellect and his ego, attempting to manipulate the physical world to suit his personal comfort. He looks down at the dirt, desperately searching for a weapon. He's in a state of supreme spiritual ignorance in that exact second.
Right. He is all of us, standing in a slow-moving line at the grocery store, just quietly seething its base human frustration.
But then reality interrupts his ego. He searches the ground and he finds nothing. There is a no stone.
A no stone.
His attempt to change the world fails. And in that tiny, fractured moment of failure, his attention is forced away from his objective. His eyes lift or his perception simply widens. And what rushes in to fill the void of the missing stone?
The wintry moon.
The wintry moon. He is suddenly confronted by the cold, clear, utterly indifferent, absolute presence of the moon. And that moonlight encompasses everything equally. The freezing night, the barking dog, his own petty human annoyance, and the empty dirt.
Wow.
The frustration dissolves not because he recited a mantra or practiced deep breathing, but because the sheer, undeniable reality of the universe interrupted his internal monologue.
That is amazing. So the spiritual realization is completely dependent on the physical reality.
Yes.
If the dog hadn't barked, he would have looked for the stone.
Yeah.
If he had found the stone, he would have thrown it and gone back to sleep, trapped in his ego.
Exactly.
The enlightenment is born directly from the friction of the mundane world.
But this brings up a major point of pushback for me, and I think for a lot of listeners.
Let's hear it.
If the ultimate truth is found in something as simple as a barking dog or a rainy window pane, why is that so deeply unsatisfying to us? Like, Blyth quotes the poet Matthew Arnold, who said, "Long fed on boundless hopes, O race of man, how angrily thou spurn'st all simpler fare."
Such a great quote. It is. Why do we angrily spurn the simple fare? Why do we demand the boundless hopes? Why do we always need something bigger?
That question cuts to the core tragedy of the human intellect. We spurn the simple fare because our egos are fundamentally designed to demand significance that revolves around us.
Ouch. Yeah.
We want boundless hopes because the concept of boundlessness allows our ego to expand infinitely. We want a religion that promises eternal life, ultimate justice, and a cosmic architecture where human beings are the most important thing in the room.
Right. We want to be the stars of the show.
Exactly. And a rainy window pane offers none of that. A rainy window pane doesn't care about your career trajectory, your anxieties, or your legacy. It just is.
And the ego is terrified of that indifference.
Terrified. The intellect exists to conquer, to analyze, to categorize, and to solve. Haiku presents a world that requires no solution.
So it's like an ego detox. We are so heavily addicted to the narrative of our own lives that we are the protagonist in a grand, sweeping epic that the sheer, quiet reality of a wet leaf on the pavement feels like an insult.
That's beautifully put. It feels like an insult.
The intellect looks at it and says, "Is this all there is? Where is the plot?" And Haiku calmly replies, "Yes, this is all there is, and it is everything."
Which serves as the perfect bridge to understanding the mechanics of how haiku is actually written.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics.
If haiku is about finding the profound in the wet leaf, how does it differ from traditional Western poetry or even other forms of Japanese poetry that also talk about nature? Because, describing a leaf is not a new invention.
Right. Wordsworth spent pages writing about daffodils. Keats wrote odes to nightingales. We have a vast tradition of nature poetry.
Huge tradition.
So what makes haiku different? If we move from what haiku looks at to how it looks at it, we hit the second major pillar of Blyth's analysis, and that is the pursuit of significance over beauty.
Yes. Significance over beauty.
And honestly, this was the most challenging concept in the material for me, because Blyth states explicitly that haiku actively, intentionally avoids beauty.
It avoids beauty as the West traditionally defines it and as older Japanese lyrical forms defined it.
Okay.
Before haiku, the dominant poetic form in Japan was the waka. Waka is a longer form, and its primary objective was largely decorative and evocative. Blyth makes a brilliant comparison, calling waka songs without words.
Songs without words.
It aims to evoke a specific, usually melancholic or romantic mood in the reader. It is deeply subjective. It engages in what we can call mind coloring.
Mind coloring, meaning the poet is taking their own emotional state, like their grief, their joy, their nostalgia, and painting it over the landscape.
Precisely.
So they aren't really showing you a tree, they're showing you their sadness.
Yeah.
They're just using the tree as a prop.
Exactly. The object is completely subservient to the emotion. But haiku possesses a specific tenderness and what Blyth calls a smallness of mind.
Smallness of the mind.
Yes, it deliberately avoids the magnificent, the infinite, and the eternal in any abstract sense. It rejects lyricism. It refuses to color the mind of the reader. It doesn't want to make the tree pretty or tragic.
So it's aiming at something else.
It aims at something much deeper and much more structural, which is significance. And to illustrate this difference, Blyth compares the feeling of haiku to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach.
I really want to unpack that Bach comparison because it's so precise. When I think of Bach, the fugues, the counterpoint, the cello suites, it is highly mathematical.
Yeah, it's pure architecture.
Right. It is architectural. It isn't the sweeping, emotionally manipulative drama of a Tchaikovsky symphony or a Beethoven sonata.
It's exact.
Tchaikovsky washes over you and almost demands that you feel a specific sweeping emotion. But Bach feels like you are observing the gears of the universe turning in perfect synchronization.
That is the exact structural difference between waka and haiku. Tchaikovsky is waka. It is beautiful, it is emotional, it is heavily filtered to produce a mood.
Yeah.
Bach, conversely, is not aiming at beauty in the lyrical emotional sense. Bach aims at architectural truth. The notes exist in a completely necessary, inevitable relationship to one another.
It's inevitable.
It is deeply profound, and as Blyth notes, some special kind of beauty is found hovering near. But the beauty is a byproduct of the truth.
Oh, I see.
The truth is the primary goal. Haiku operates on that same frequency. It is seeking the absolute, unvarnished reality of the thing itself. If the resulting poem is beautiful, it is almost an accident of its accuracy.
To drive this point about truth over intellect home, Blyth uses another astonishing analogy. He compares Socrates to Christ, but he frames Christ explicitly as a poet.
Yes.
He's the men follow Christ, not Socrates, because Christ was a poet. What is the distinction he's drawing there between the philosopher and the poet?
Let's look at the function of Socrates. Socrates was the ultimate philosopher. His method, the Socratic method, was designed to use the intellect to dismantle the intellect.
Right, asking endless questions.
He questioned you until he exposed your ignorance. He proved that you don't actually know what you think you know. That is incredibly valuable, but it is fundamentally a negative action.
But it takes things away.
Right. It clears the room, but it leaves the room empty. A poet, however, and Blyth, argues that the true nature of all existence is a poetical one. A poet does the opposite.
What does the poet do?
Haiku doesn't show you your ignorance. It shows you what you knew all the time, but didn't know you knew. It reminds us that we are poets insofar as we live at all.
So the philosopher points to the empty space where our assumptions used to be, but the poet points to the fullness of what remains.
Yes. And this links directly back to a core tenet of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the absolute equivalence of the phenomenal world and the noumenal world.
Whoa, okay, hold on. Phenomenal and noumenal worlds. You're going to have to translate that for the listener because those are some heavy philosophical terms.
Fair enough. In philosophy, the phenomenal world is the world of your senses. It's the things you can touch, see, and hear. The barking dog, the wet leaf, the feeling of cold water.
Okay, the physical stuff.
Right. The noumenal world is the hidden ultimate reality. It's the divine truth, the infinite, the thing in itself that exists behind the curtain of our senses.
Behind the curtain.
Exactly. Many religions and philosophies argue that the phenomenal world is just an illusion or a distraction, and you have to pierce through it to reach the noumenal world.
Right. Escape the world to find the truth.
But Zen and Mahayana Buddhism assert something radical. They say they are the exact same thing.
They are the same.
There is no curtain. The ultimate reality is not hiding behind the barking dog. The ultimate reality is the barking dog. There's a famous Zen saying, Blyth quotes, "Your ordinary mind, that is the way."
Your ordinary mind is the way. That is simultaneously the most relieving and the most challenging concept we've discussed today.
How so?
Well, it's relieving because it means my ordinary mind, which is currently worried about whether I left the garage door open or what I'm going to make for dinner, isn't fundamentally broken or entirely separated from the divine.
Right, you aren't doing it wrong.
But it's challenging because it means I have no excuse. I can't say, oh, I'll find enlightenment later when I have time to go on a fancy retreat. It demands that I find it right now in the hammering of a nail or the smell of a chrysanthemum.
And not just the concept of a chrysanthemum, but the smell of this specific chrysanthemum in this specific room at this exact second.
Wow.
The specificity is the portal to the infinite. To really see how this rejection of beauty in favor of significance works on the page, let's look at the contrast Blyth provides between a waka poem and a haiku.
Let's do it.
Let's start with the decorative waka poem by Hidemaru. It reads, "Ah, plovers, when you cry on the evening waves of Omi, how I grieve, remembering things of long ago."
It's undeniably beautiful. The imagery of evening waves, crying birds, remembering the past.
Very lyrical.
But it is entirely subjective. The birds are barely there. They are just a trigger mechanism for the poet to talk about his own grief.
Exactly.
It is the definition of mind coloring. The poet is standing in front of the landscape, blocking the view, and just saying, hey, look at how sad I am.
Now compare that to a haiku by the poet Buson. Buson writes, "After it was dark, I began to want to change the way I grafted it."
That is almost hilariously mundane compared to the waka.
Isn't it?
After it was dark, I began to want to change the way I grafted it. We have gone from sweeping evening waves and ancient grief to a guy lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, second-guessing his gardening techniques.
Yes.
He tied a branch to a tree, it got dark, he went inside, and now he can't stop thinking about whether he tied the knot right.
It's so relatable.
There's absolutely zero traditional beauty in that image. No crying birds, no lyricism, just pure, unadulterated, nagging second-guessing.
But consider the profound significance he captures there. Busan has isolated a purely non-beautiful state of mind, but one that is intensely, universally human.
Oh, absolutely.
Have you ever sent an email, gotten it to bed, and then stared at the dark ceiling wondering if your tone was too harsh?
All the time.
Or have you ever fixed a pipe under the sink and spent the rest of the night wondering if you tightened the wrench enough? It is the restless mind in the dark, the nagging feeling of incomplete action. He presents this psychological truth completely naked, without any dressing up. It rejects the grand narrative, but it values above all things that human warmth we discussed earlier.
It reminds me of the Issa poem we talked about right at the start of the deep dive.
Yeah.
The cow comes moo, moo out of the mist.
Right, the cow.
On the surface, moo, moo. Sounds like a page from a toddler's board book. But within the framework of haiku, it is doing something incredibly sophisticated by refusing to be sophisticated.
That's a great way to phrase it.
I was actually trying to come up with an analogy for this, to ground it in how we communicate visually today. Think of the difference between a highly edited, Instagram-filtered sunset photo with a cursive, inspirational quote overlaid on it.
Okay.
That is the waka. It is artificially beautiful, it is heavily manipulated, and it is explicitly telling you exactly how you're supposed to feel.
Right, it's directing you.
Now contrast that with a raw, slightly blurry, unedited Polaroid photo you find in a drawer. It's a picture of your dad in the garage leaning over a broken lawnmower. The lighting is bad, he looks tired, he's holding a wrench.
Yeah.
There is no filter, no inspirational quote, no attempt at art. But looking at that Polaroid somehow hits you in the chest and makes you want to cry, because it contains the entire unvarnished weight of his life, his effort, and your reality. The haiku is the Polaroid.
That analogy operates perfectly because it highlights the absence of effort.
Right.
The Polaroid doesn't try to be beautiful.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't try, it achieves a level of significance that the highly curated Instagram photo can never reach. The Instagram photo is an abstraction of reality, while the Polaroid is the radical return to things.
Yeah.
Issa's cow going moo out of the mist is that Polaroid. If a Western romantic poet were writing it, it would be a majestic stag bellowing into the void of eternity.
Right, some grand beast.
But Issa gives us a clumsy, heavy cow making a slightly ridiculous noise. It is real. It exists entirely in its own right, utterly indifferent to whether we find it poetic or not.
So we have established that the ultimate goal is to capture this raw, unfiltered reality. We are aiming for the ordinary mind. But this brings us to a massive, practical, technical wall.
The wordless state.
Yes, and I really want to push back on the mechanics of this. Because if the goal is significance, if the goal is to capture the ordinary mind without coloring it with concepts, how does the poet actually achieve this using words?
It's the ultimate challenge.
Because words are inherently conceptual. A word is not the thing, it is a symbol of the thing. You are using the intellect's primary tool to try and bypass the intellect. How does that possibly work?
You have hit on the central paradox of haiku, and honestly the central paradox of Zen itself. You are using words to achieve a state beyond words. Blyth argues that haiku is fundamentally a wordless state. The words in a haiku are not used to build a description or express a concept. They are used to clear away what stands between us and the real thing.
But that runs counter to everything we are taught about writing and communication.
Completely.
We are taught to use words as building blocks. You add adjectives to add color. You add adverbs to add action. You build layers of meaning. You construct an entire world.
And that construction is exactly what haiku is trying to demolish. Western poetry often treats words as sacred. Blyth describes how Western writers often use words as the vicegerents of God, like they are the ultimate conveyors of truth.
Right.
But in Eastern thought, words are incredibly dangerous. They can easily become fetters of the spirit. They trap us in concepts. You get so caught up reading the menu that you forget to eat the meal.
Oh, I like that. Reading the menu instead of eating the meal.
Exactly. Zen is fiercely, aggressively non-intellectual. Blyth quotes John Keats here, who famously said, "Philosophy will clip an angel's wings." If you are conceptualizing the angel, analyzing its aerodynamics, you aren't experiencing the awe of the angel.
So if the intellect is the problem, and words are the tools of the intellect, how does the haiku poet strip the intellect away? Is brevity just a tool to exhaust the intellect before it gets started?
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. The brevity of haiku, the famous constraint of 17 syllables, is not just a mathematical game or a structural neatness, it is a spiritual constraint.
A spiritual constraint.
The goal of the poet is to reduce the complexity of the material to the exact, precise point where the true nature of the thing is revealed, and then stop.
And not a single word more.
Right. If you use 18 syllables, if you add one unnecessary adjective, the ego sneaks back into the poem. You start explaining, justifying, beautifying, you start showing off.
You start telling the reader how clever you are.
Exactly. The brevity is an enforced humility, but the mechanics go deeper than just being short. Japanese haiku utilizes specific technical tools to enforce this wordlessness. One of the most important is the kireji, or the cutting word.
A cutting word, what does that do?
A kireji is a specific word, often placed at the end of a line, that doesn't necessarily have a direct translation, but acts as a structural pivot. Words like ya or kana.
Yeah.
It operates almost like a cinematic cut. It abruptly severs the stream of thought, creating a gap, a pause, a sudden juxtaposition between two images.
Oh, interesting.
It prevents the intellect from smoothing the poem out into a logical sentence. It creates a spark across a gap. It forces the reader's unconscious mind to leap across the void to connect the images, bypassing the logical brain entirely.
So it's a mechanism for creating negative space. You provide
Right.
the framing, and the reader's unconscious fills the center.
Yes, and this relies on a core philosophical concept Blyth discusses, which is difference is identity, identity is difference.
Another heavy one.
Basically, what this means practically is that reading a haiku is not an intellectual transaction where I hand you a piece of data. It is an appeal from the unconscious of the poet directly to the unconscious of the reader. It is fundamentally a koan.
A koan. Like the famous Zen riddle. What is the sound of one hand clapping?
Exactly.
It's an unanswerable question designed to break your logical brain. You can't solve it with a spreadsheet.
You really can't. Blyth beautifully describes a haiku as an open door looking shut. You do not solve a haiku by analyzing its historical context or its syllable count. You experience it.
You experience it.
And to create this experience, the poet has to approach the subject with an absolute lack of self-consciousness. Basho, the greatest of the haiku masters, famously instructed his students, get a 3-foot child to write haiku.
Get a 3-foot child. So he is literally telling adult, highly trained poets to write like a toddler.
Yeah.
Which entirely explains Issa's cow going moo.
It completely explains it. Think about how a 3-foot child interacts with the world. A child observes without an agenda. A child does not look at a flower and try to craft a metaphor about the fleeting nature of youth. A child doesn't try to impress the critics or write a fine poem. A child simply points a sticky finger at a thing and announces what it is, doing it naturally, freely, and unselfconsciously.
Let's look at a poem by Basho that perfectly illustrates this toddler-like lack of intellectuality.
Oh, this is a great one.
It goes, "The rose of Sharon by the roadside was eaten by the horse."
What an absolute masterpiece of non-intellectuality.
It is almost anti-poetry.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the setup. The rose of Sharon is a beautiful, evocative, delicate flower. If a 19th century English romantic poet saw a rose of Sharon, we would get 6 stanzas on its delicate petals, the tragedy of its fleeting bloom, its representation of lost love.
They get a whole book.
Exactly. But what does Basho do? He says, yeah, there was a nice flower by the road, and then a horse walked up and ate it. Chomp, gone, move along.
And in doing so, he captures the absolute, unsentimental, unvarnished reality of nature. The horse does not care about aesthetics, beauty, or poetry. The horse cares about calories.
Just calories.
The flower doesn't have a tragic narrative. It doesn't weep when it is eaten. It simply exists, and then it is consumed. By utterly refusing to intellectualize the event, Basho creates a moment of pure zen. It is funny, it is incredibly blunt, and it is profoundly true.
There's another poem Blyth quotes that uses pure observation of movement to bypass the intellect. It goes, "The train passes, how the smoke swirls around the young leaves." That is the entire poem. It's like a 5-second video clip.
But analyze the unspoken contrast in that 5-second clip. You have the heavy, industrial, linear, noisy, violent passing of the train. And contrasted perfectly against it, you have the delicate, chaotic, silent, weightless swirling of the smoke around the fresh, vibrant young leaves.
Yeah.
He doesn't tell you what it means. He doesn't step in to moralize and say, behold how the march of industry encroaches upon the purity of nature. He just gives you the heavy iron, the white smoke, and the green leaves, and your unconscious mind does all the heavy lifting.
But let me challenge this one more time, because I want to make sure the mechanics of this are crystal clear.
Bring it on.
If the ultimate goal is this wordless state, if words are just getting in the way and trapping us in the intellect, why bother writing the poem at all?
Right.
Why doesn't Basho just point at the horse and say nothing?
Right.
If silence is the goal, how do the words actually wipe the mirror clean for the reader instead of just smudging it up with more concepts?
That is the ultimate paradox. You need the finger to point at the moon, even knowing that the finger is not the moon itself.
Okay.
If we just sat in silence, we wouldn't achieve the ordinary mind. We would likely just get lost in our own internal monologue. We would sit in silence and think about our taxes, our arguments, our anxieties.
Definitely. Silence is loud.
Exactly. Silence alone does not guarantee presence. Often it just amplifies the ego's noise. The words of a haiku act as a precise, calculated shock to the system. They are carefully chosen points of focus that arrest the wandering mind.
I picture it like the engine of a boat. Your intellect is this massive, noisy diesel engine chugging along, making all this racket, churning up the water, constantly moving you forward towards some goal.
I love this imagery.
You can't hear the ocean because the engine is just too loud. The words of the haiku are not adding to the noise. They're the physical action of turning the key to shut the engine off.
And what happens the exact second the engine shuts off?
And the boat stalls out, the momentum stops, and suddenly you can hear the water lapping against the hull. The words just turn the key.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The words are not there to build a new world. They are there to dismantle your current state of distraction so the real world can rush in.
Yeah.
By giving you exactly enough syllables to frame the image, the smoke, the leaves, the horse, but completely refusing to give you enough words to tell you what to think about it, the haiku forces your intellect to stall out.
It stalls the brain.
The logical brain reaches the end of the 17th syllable, expects a moral or a conclusion, finds nothing but a cow going moo, and stalls. And in that stalled, silent moment, the wordless state is achieved. You hear the water against the hull.
Which brings us to the final, and I think most challenging, concept of our deep dive. Because up until this point, we have been analyzing haiku as literature. We've been looking at words on a page, analyzing syllable counts, and kirigi.
Right, the mechanics.
But Blyth argues, and this is crucial to his entire thesis, that haiku is not just a form of poetry. It is a way of living your entire life. It is the 24-hour haiku.
It's the practical application of Zen, taking it off the page and putting it into your physical body as you navigate the world.
Right.
Basho himself believed that the primary object of haikai was to set to rights common parlance and ordinary language. He wanted to turn daily prose into poetry. He didn't just want to sit at a desk and write a good poem. He wanted to live a life where every single action, every moment, had the significance, the brevity, and the clarity of a poem.
He wanted to live 24 hours a day with meaning in every moment. I have to be honest, that sounds exhausting.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It really does.
Yeah.
Being hyper-aware, hyper-present, extracting profound spiritual significance from every time you tie your shoes or open a door.
It sounds exhausting because we associate meaning with intense intellectual effort or high emotional stakes. We think meaningful means dramatic.
Right.
But the meaning Basho is talking about is diffuse. It's a quiet, habitual observation. It is the exact opposite of effort. To explain how this works in practice, Blyth connects the state of mind required for haiku to other traditional Japanese arts, specifically the art of Ticha no Yu and no theater.
The tea ceremony. I have seen videos of this, and it is incredibly precise. The master cleans the utensils, boils the water, whisks the matcha. It is very slow, very deliberate.
Yes.
But how does the physical act of pouring hot water relate to a 17-syllable poem about a horse eating a flower?
They are born from the exact same internal architecture. Blyth details the 4 foundational qualities of the art of tea. They are wa, kei, sei, and jaku. This translates to harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility.
Harmony, respect, purity, tranquility. Wa, kei, sei, jaku. Let's break those down. What do they actually look like in practice?
Harmony is the balance of all the elements. The water, the tea, the bowl, the guest, the room. Respect is the deep reverence for the object in its own right, treating the simple ceramic bowl not as a tool to be used, but as an entity worthy of attention.
Okay.
Purity is the state of perception without the ego clearing the mind of its dirt and distraction. And tranquility is the physical and mental repose that results from the first 3.
Right.
Blyth explicitly states that these 4 qualities are the exact states of mind required for both reading and writing haiku. The poet must have harmony with the scene, respect for the wet leaf, purity of perception to not project their ego onto it, and the tranquility to let the poem stall the intellect.
And you see the physical embodiment of this state in movement. Blyth talks about how a tea master or a no theater actor walks across the stage. They move incredibly deliberately.
But the crucial detail Blyth notes is that they are unconscious of walking. They walk as if they were not walking.
That sounds like a contradiction. How can you be deliberate but unconscious?
Think about a master craftsman or an elite athlete in the flow state. They are not thinking, now I will move my left foot forward, now I will shift my weight.
Oh, I see.
The intellect is entirely turned off. The action happens through them. There is perfect repose and activity. They are completely present, yet completely devoid of self-consciousness or the desire to show off their skill to the audience. This is what Basho achieved in poetry. He achieved the literary equivalent of a tea master pouring water. He wrote without trying to write.
Perfect repose and activity. You are doing the thing, but you are not trying to do the thing. The ego is removed from the action.
This is the ultimate realization of Zen. We often think of Zen enlightenment as a sudden, explosive spasm of religious ecstasy, the heavens opening up, angels singing, a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah, the cinematic version.
Exactly. But Blyth argues that true enlightenment is much quieter. It is the habitual, gentle observation of imperfect existence. It's the little life of little people encompassed in the greater day.
Let's look at a verse Basho wrote that captures this exact state of perfect, quiet repose. He wrote it in praise of a poetess named Sonojo. It goes, "The white chrysanthemum, not a speck of dust to meet the eye."
It's incredibly simple on the surface, just a clean flower, but map the 4 qualities of the tea ceremony onto it: harmony, respect, purity, tranquility.
They are all there.
They are all entirely present. The absolute purity of the white flower, the tranquility of the silent scene, the deep respect for its pristine nature, and the harmony of the whole image. But it is not a static, dead perfection like a plastic flower. It is a living, breathing harmony.
And he is using the image of the flower to praise the poetess. He's essentially saying that her life and her poetry is like this chrysanthemum, uncluttered, no specks of dust, no ego getting in the way. She exists in a state of wa kai sei jaku.
To further illustrate the danger of the ego in art and life, Blyth connects this to another traditional art form called nagare, which is a specific style of flower arrangement. He highlights a fundamental teaching of nagare, which dictates that the absolute worst thing you can possibly do when arranging flowers is attempt to show something artistic.
Oh, man. Don't try to be artistic. That cuts against every instinct of anyone who has ever tried to create anything, write anything, or post anything on social media.
Seriously.
We all desperately want to put our personal stamp on our work. We want to twist the branches and arrange the petals to ensure everyone looking at it knows how clever, how deep, and how talented we are. We want the credit.
Which is exactly why the ego destroys the art. The highest art hides beauty rather than revealing it. It gets out of the way. If you try to make the flowers look artistic, you are imposing your will, your intellect, and your ego onto the flowers. You are turning them from living things into an abstraction of your own cleverness. You are not respecting them, you are using them. If you arrange them with wa, kei, sei, and jaku, you simply facilitate an environment where the flowers are allowed to fully be themselves. You remove the artist.
Okay, so let's synthesize this entire journey and apply it. What does this actually mean for you, the listener? Because chances are you are not a 17th century Japanese haiku master, you are not a tea master, and you probably aren't arranging chrysanthemums.
Probably not.
You are commuting or working or folding laundry. The profound takeaway here is that you do not have to climb a mountain to find enlightenment. You don't need to quit your job, abandon your family, and join a monastery to achieve a radical spiritual return.
No.
You can find it while waiting in line at the grocery store. You can find it in noticing the exact pitch of the sound your coffee cup makes when it clinks against the saucer in the morning.
Yes.
It is about paying attention so fiercely and so entirely without judgment or intellectualizing that the mundane friction of your life becomes magical. It's about looking at the frustrating things, the barking dogs keeping you awake, the slow traffic, the mistakes you make tying a knot in the dark, and see them not as obstacles to your peace, but as the actual physical material of the infinite.
That is the exact application of the 24-hour haiku. It is a life lived in a state of constant, gentle attention to the reality in front of you. It is the profound acceptance that the phenomenal world, the dirt, the noise, the rain, the cow, is the noumenal world.
Right.
The Socratic philosopher tells you that you are trapped in the cave looking at shadows. The pale ascetic tells you that you must escape the cave to see the sun. But the haiku poet tells you to look closely at the shadow on the wall and realize it is a perfect, complete expression of the light.
Wow.
There is no other place to get to. This is it. Your ordinary mind is the way, and it is enough.
We started this deep dive exploring the human impulse to escape the world versus the radical impulse to return to it. We have seen how haiku is the ultimate vehicle for that return. It is not a rigid poetic structure meant to constrain thought and force it into 17 syllables. It is a precision tool of liberation.
A tool of liberation.
It uses the constraint of brevity, the pivot of the kyrurgy, to forcefully clear away the intellect. It cuts through our abstractions, our desperate need for lyrical beauty, and our exhausting need to be clever. It forces a radical return to the reality of the present moment, allowing us to see that the mind that hears a horse chew a flower and simply registers it without judgment is the ultimate truth.
We've established that haiku is fundamentally a koan, an unanswerable question that breaks the intellect, an open door looking shut. And we've established that this state of mind is meant to be lived 24 hours a day, not just while writing poetry.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on, something to take with you into the rest of your day, a parting koan of your own.
I like that.
If haiku is meant to be lived 24 hours a day, what happens to the perception of your own life when you stop trying to solve your daily frustrations? What happens when, instead of trying to mentally fix the barking dog or conquer the traffic jam or find profound meaning in the rainy window pane, you stop the engine?
You stall out.
What happens when you start viewing the mundane, annoying, beautiful friction of your life as a perfectly complete, wordless poem unfolding right in front of you?
It changes everything.
It really does. We began this deep dive talking about the expectation of distance, the ingrained idea that you have to climb a mountain, leave the messy world behind, and reach some pristine, abstract peak to finally find the truth. But maybe the real enlightenment isn't at the top of the mountain at all. Maybe the real enlightenment is just finally realizing that you are already standing exactly where you need to be, even if you're just looking for a rock to throw at a dog in the moonlight.